We are presently in front of Madison Elementary School, where it all began, the first crucial turning point of my life. And as I reflect back on this crucial turning point, it brings up a lot of feelings and emotions, especially when I drive by Madison School periodically. And I realize how much I've grown, but still I reflect back on some of the pain I still feel that didn't give me the opportunity to let my mom know how much I really love her and appreciate her as bringing me into this world.
Is declared brain dead. That's whatever we're.
Hello, I'm Dumas Martin. I first met Mr. Paul Darrell Scott in Pasadena, California at the La Cañada Flint Ridge Center in February of 2012. In June of 2012, Mr. Scott hired me to set up his infrastructure for his organizations, Chains to Plains Incorporated and Authentic Affairs Incorporated. His passion for life, people, and sharing his life experiences is unparalleled. His job includes saving lives through organ donations as a family care specialist and helping to enhance people's lives through tissue donations. His integrity, honesty, and spiritual focus makes him a pleasure to encounter. He embraces values that all leaders hold dear: fairness and kindness. As the 23rd Psalm says, "Yea, though I walk through the shadow of the valley of death, I will fear no evil." He approaches life without fear, only courage and great anticipation. Ladies and gentlemen, may I present to you Mr. Paul Darrell Scott.
We all have our own unique story to tell, and today I've chosen to share mine before you. I thank you for allowing me to appear before you today, and I trust that everyone in attendance is able to get something out of this that will benefit them in life at some capacity. The first crucial time that I can remember that really took me for a loop was when I was 5 years old, and my mother was taking me to preschool for the very first time. And as we were driving and we pulled up in front of the school, she pulled up to the curve. And in my mind, I'm thinking that she's going to get out with me and walk up to this classroom with me and everything. But my mom's instructions were, Nana would come pick you up at noon, and your dad or I will come pick you up from Nana's house, whichever one of us get off work first. And that's the way it's going to go. And as I exited my mom's car and I was walking up the walkway to enter into the school, I looked back and saw my mom driving off. And the thoughts that crossed my mind was, "Mom, I thought you really loved me. And if you really loved me, why did you bring me to this place and leave me?" I didn't have a chance to get an introduction to the school campus in advance or a tour or any of that. It was just a one-time deal that I was exposed to this for the very first time, and it frightened me. And as I went into the school, I didn't know who to really trust or how to really interact or anything, because I had never had any type of exposure to anything of this nature. Can you imagine a young child at the age of 5 years old having this type of responsibility placed on him without going through the proper training or channels of development to be prepared for it? Following that, I found myself having difficulty in school. And in the process of having that difficulty, I didn't feel I could go talk to my mom and dad about some of the things that I sensed taking place at the school campus, because I felt they were responsible for it happening to me in the first place. Now, my mom and I were very, very close. But following my mother taking me to school the very first time and dropping me off, it felt like something just cut me in half. And one side of me fell to the left, the other side fell to the right, and I didn't feel I could trust my mother anymore. And that day, my mother and I did not have the relationship that we had before. And I don't know exactly what was taking place inside of me. I know my mind was not developed enough for me to intellectualize all the thoughts and emotions that was going on. I just knew that I was feeling what I was feeling. And that was the first time on a school campus or my educational experience that I had that really devastated me the most, that I didn't know how to talk or share or get any of it out. This is when I was 3 years old. Innocent, loving, caring, little young guy, youngest of 7 children, entering into a world not being provided the proper instructions of how to go about preparing to develop the skill that I would need to go on and live a long, decent, healthy, responsible, and productive life as a citizen of the United States of America. So the next experience that I had that was school related was when I was 10 years old. And this is during the time when they started integrating schools, which was in 1971. I lived in the black community, and I was in the group of individuals that was bused to the white community. And there was a group of individuals in the white community that was bused to the schools in the black community. But as I'm riding on the bus going to Hale Elementary, and I'm noticing that as I got closer, the homes looked so beautiful and immaculate, and the yards would be so manicured and pedicured, and they had basketball courts, and they had swimming pools, and they had tennis courts, and I only saw that at parks. So I'm wondering, wow, these people had this stuff at home. So when I would get to school, I would somewhat feel like I was being punished because of where I lived at, but yet how I had to travel to school and what I was subjected to see. And I had an experience one day where I was given an assignment by my 5th grade teacher named Mrs. Barnes. And I was having a problem with the assignment, understanding it. So I went up to Mrs. Barnes' desk and I asked Mrs. Barnes to give me a hand with the assignment because I wasn't understanding it. Mrs. Barnes asked me to have a seat, Paul, and I'll be with you in a moment. I politely went and sat back down. And while I'm sitting there patiently waiting for Mrs. Barnes to give me her assistance, one of my classmates went up to get some assistance from Mrs. Barnes, and she gave him her help immediately. So I scratched my head and I said, oh, Mrs. Barnes must have forgot about me. So I went back up to the desk to remind her, Mrs. Barnes, I asked you for some help. And she accused me of causing a class disturbance because I came up to request her assistance with understanding this assignment for the second time. And she sent me to the guidance lab. And I couldn't understand what I actually had done to cause a disturbance when I was simply asking for help to understand the assignment. So when I got to the guidance lab and I saw the group of other individuals that I was around in there that really were troublemakers on the school ground, I figured, well, I guess I might as well become like them. And since I'm being accused of something I didn't do, I'm going to give them a reason to accuse me next time because I didn't like being accused of something I didn't do. So I did become a problem on the school ground. But I managed to make it through the 5th grade. And I didn't make it through the 5th grade because I was learning the material. I primarily made it through the 5th grade because I was a troublemaker and they didn't want me to repeat the 5th grade again. They wanted to pass me on long so they didn't have to deal with me again. So I went on into the 6th grade. And that following year, I went to a classroom by a teacher by the name of Mr. Axel. And Mr. Axel was Afro-American. And Mr. Axel happened to have an assignment one day where he asked everybody to stand up in the classroom and say, what would you like to be in life when you grow up? And when it became my turn, the only thing I could actually think of me wanting to be was a gentleman that used to come by our home to pick up our laundry that my mom would have prepared on one day during the week, and he would bring it back 2 or 3 days later, and he had his own van, and he would leave politely and drive off after picking up the laundry, and he'd bring it back a couple of days. It'd be nice and have bags around it. It'd be well put together. And I said, that's something I would like to be one day. So that's the only thing I could think of. So I presented that in class one day, and Mr. Axel just so happened to have made a snide remark to make fun of me because that's something that I had requested to do. And he said, that's something I can see you doing, and you probably will end up doing that, Paul. And everybody in the classroom started laughing following his saying that, and I couldn't understand what happened. And that really hurt me real bad. So at the end of the class, I went up to Mr. Axel and told him that I felt that that wasn't fair for him to have put me on the spot like that because it hurt my feelings and it's like he made fun of me. And Mr. Axel kind of pushed me to the side and told me that I was lucky to even have a chance to go to school, so I should be appreciating that and have him for a teacher. And he didn't answer my question, so I felt like he put his hands on me in a really offensive way. And because he was an adult, I called my father. And I called my father and told him what had happened. And my father came out to the schoolhouse. And when he came out to the schoolhouse, he was looking for Mr. Axel. And when he came to the classroom, Mr. Axel was no longer in the classroom. And some of my classmates who were from the community that I lived in went and let Mr. Axel know, because a few of them were in my classroom. And when they let Mr. Axel know that Paul's father is out here, he want to talk to you about something that you did to Paul, Mr. Axel went into the principal's office to report it to the principal, whose name at that time was Mr. Kaufman. And when Mr. Axel went into the principal's office and I found out about that, I let my dad know he's in the principal's office. And my father happened to go up in the principal's office, and he let Mr. Axel know, he let Mr. Kaufman know, and he let everybody else that was in that principal's office know that I was his son. And that if they had a problem with me on the campus in any kind of way, that he was the one that they needed to contact before they did think about putting their hands on me or doing anything else. That they needed to get his permission, and they needed to report that to him. And for the future, if they have any problem with me, that he want them to call him and let him know, and he'll be the one to put me in my place. And that if it happens again without his permission, somebody's going to have to answer to him for that. And I didn't have any more problems out of Mr. Axel, Mr. Kaufman, or anyone else following my father coming on the school campus and letting them know how he felt towards his son. This is my mother and father. This picture was taken in 1974 when my sister Pam got married. And it was a very beautiful wedding that took place. And my sister went off to bear 2 children and move on with her life. And this was the first time that I ever saw my mom and dad take a picture together. And it was a wonderful experience that I held very dear to my heart. And I value it very much to this very day as a result of the example that they set for me. But one day, I was in the locker room after showering up, and a friend of mine that was had his locker next to me asked me if I wanted to take a smoke with him at our lunch break. And I said, take a smoke. And he showed me a little bag that had some marijuana in it. So I said, sure, no problem. And when we took the lunch break and we were out on the football field, walking around the track, he lit up what was called a joint. And I took a couple of puffs on it, and it seemed to have taken my mind to a place of peace, and that I was able to forget about any type of pain or suffering or defeat or failure, any of that. And it just caused me to feel relaxed and at peace with myself. And that was something that I really felt I bonded with at that point, and it gave me something inside that I felt that I never had had. And so the next day at school, this friend of mine came at me and said, hey man, if you decide you'd like to make some extra money for yourself, I could arrange for you to be able to get a couple of packages of this, and you can sell it. And in the process of selling it, you can pay off what you owe for it, and you have a few extra dollars made for yourself. Well, with me coming from a low-income family, living in the poverty-stricken community, and me being bused in the areas that these people had these real beautiful homes with these swimming pool and tennis courts and basketball courts in the backyard, I said, yeah, this would be a good idea. Plus, I wasn't able to have neat clothes to wear to school all the time, and I realized that this would afford me an opportunity to buy me a little better set of clothes for myself. So I got involved with selling drugs and going from one level of drug selling to the next level of drug selling, and I went from marijuana. I went from marijuana to selling PCP, and I went from selling PCP to selling cocaine, and I kind of fluctuated backwards and forth with these things that I was doing. But this afforded me an opportunity to begin to buy a different set of clothes to keep me up to par. I could get my hair cut more often. I could stay a lot more fresher and neater. And as a result of that, the money was able to influence people in a way that me just being who I wasn't able to influence them, and I liked that. So I gravitated towards that more and more. And as I went through school, eventually I ended up getting kicked out of school because I got an incident on the school campus that resulted in me trying to make a drug transaction and some other people intervening trying to rob the people that I was selling the drugs to. And as a result, this got reported to the school authorities, and I had to go before the school principal. And as a result of everything coming out, they kicked me out of school, and I wasn't able to graduate. But I got more and more involved in this lifestyle following that. And I was in the 12th grade when this happened, and all I needed to graduate was 35 units. And I didn't get those units, and I was out on the streets running around selling drugs now at a rapid rate and pace, and was just totally out of control. And one day, I was doing a drug transaction between two enemies that I didn't know were enemies. My main concern was to make the money. I was introduced to the lifestyle, and my brother-in-law gave it to me at the maximum capacity, how to operate, and I thought that, hey, nobody else can tell me any more about this, but I found myself in a situation where I'm doing a transaction between two enemies, and in the process, they got into a feud. One of them ended up killing the other one. I just packed up my stuff and left, because the laws of the street was if you see something, you keep your mouth shut, you don't do any talking or telling. And that was the only income I had coming in, only life I had going for myself. So I resumed living the same lifestyle I was living. I just kept my mouth shut and journeyed on. But 2 months and 3 weeks later, the law enforcement happened to accumulate enough evidence to place me at the scene of the crime. And they got a search warrant for my arrest. They came to my residence, which I was living with my mom and dad, with a search warrant. I was not at home on that occasion that they came there. When they searched the house, they happened to find narcotics, PCP, and some marijuana in the room that I lived in. My mother and father knew nothing about me being caught up in this type of lifestyle, because they slept downstairs and I slept upstairs, and they were elderly people now. So I was able to do these things and get away with it without my parents knowing it, because they were very naive to this type of activities. So in the process of them accumulating this evidence, they was able to get a warrant, for additional warrant for my arrest, and they were looking for me. I just happened to pull up in front of my parents' house where I was living, and they were exiting the property of my parents' house with a lot of evidence that they had accumulated, and a lot of stuff that they were taking in as evidence. And they came up to me and let me know, "Are you Paul Scott?" And I said, "Yes, I am." They said, "We have a warrant for your arrest." And I said, "A warrant for what?" And they said a warrant for murder. And they named the gentleman who the murder pertained to. And right then and there, I knew, oh man, it's related to that occasion. And I was taken into custody on October the 1st of 1980. However, 2 days before that, I was involved in a relationship with a young lady that she was just a young lady that I had on the side that I was involved with. I had my high school sweetheart, which was that young lady with the brains that I made mention of that helped keep my grades up for me to stay on the athletic teams. And as a result of my relationship with her, it helped me have somewhat of a commitment and learn about being committed and taking care of business and some responsibilities, because she didn't have her dad in her life. So it's time that I would make a little extra money with the lifestyle I was living, with being selling drugs, and I would purchase her some extra school clothes to help her get extra school material, because she was being raised in a single parent home. And it was time that I would take her and her little sister out to dinner and take them to different little amusement parks, and we would have fun and enjoy life. And so this lady on the side ended up getting pregnant by me, and she chose to have the child. I got placed into custody, and they were charging me with possessing the drugs for sale and murder. And as the whole process went through, I was convicted of possessing the drugs for sale and second-degree murder, and I received a sentence of 18 years to life in the California Department of Corrections. 8 months and 3 weeks later, that child was born. That child was born on June the 25th of 1981. And on June the 21st, I turned 20 years old at Chino Reception Center, in the process of being orientated for them to determine what institution they was going to send me to. And on June the 25th, I was contacted by the officer that ran the module I was in. He came up to let me know that your counselor would like to see you right now. It has something to do with a child being born that's supposed to be yours. I was taken to my counselor's office, which her name was Bobby Benson, and she let me know that a new Paul Darrell Scott has just been born at the Huntington Hospital in Pasadena, and that his mother went through some complications giving birth to him, and she would like to talk to you. would you like to make a phone call? And I said, yes, sure, please. And she called to the Huntington Hospital. She got my son's mother on the phone. I was able to talk to her. She shared with me that she named him after me, and she shared with me the complications that she had. And she let me know once she got a chance to get out and get home and get him together, that she would bring him to see me as soon as possible. And I didn't know what type of response to tell her back in return, anything, because the young lady that was my high school sweetheart had been sticking with me all the way through the whole process I was going through at this point. She initially received a scholarship to go to San Diego State, my high school sweetheart. And she was in her first semester whenever I was taken into custody on this case. And after her completing that first semester, she moved back to Pasadena and enrolled in Pasadena City College and got a job on the side to assist with helping me through the procedures that I was going through while I was in the county jail fighting the cases in which I was. After getting convicted, we had a long talk, and it was determined that once I got sent to the institution, I was going to start out doing the time that I had received, the sentence I had received, that we were going to get married. So I had all this going on in my head, a child being born, and me getting married, and I'm only 20 years old with an 18 to life sentence. So I got sent to California Men's Colony, was the first institution I went to, and I was there for a couple of weeks before the young lady I married came to see me, and we had a beautiful visit, and she informed me that she was aware that a child was born that's supposed to be my child, and she asked me, is it my child? And I let her know I was involved with the young lady, but it very well could be, and I admit that, you know, I had some things going on with her, but it's your decision whether you want to stick with me or not. And she let me know I was with you when you was out, and I was enjoying the things that you were doing for me in my life. I would feel bad if I abandoned you now, especially when it seems like you need me more than ever now. Which was true. I really did need her, because I didn't have the type of opportunity to make any connections on an intimate level with any other female other than her in my life. And I needed to continue that, because that's something that we had going while I was out there in society. So for my first 3 years of incarceration, this young lady stuck by my side all the way. And she went from visiting me from twice a month to once a month to, after we got married, visiting me only on our family visits until it was too tough for her to come see me at all. And she eventually let me know that, Paul, this is too tough for me to handle, and I'm going to have to go in my own direction, and I don't mean to abandon you, but it doesn't look like we're going to have a future together. And I'm doing time just like you doing it, and it's having more of an effect on me sometimes than I think it's having on you, because you're here, and I got to live two lifestyles whenever you only have to live this one. So I gave her my blessings. We ended up getting a divorce. She went her way, and I got focused in on realizing that I got to learn how to read and write. And my only source of freedom was going to be obtained through my ability to learn how to read and write. So I began to try to study and read, but I really wasn't motivated very much to do so. So there was a riot one day on the yard that I was housed on, A-Quad. As I was being escorted back to my cell, I'm being escorted by an older gentleman that was on my side. And he told me, which his name was Pops, everybody called him Pops, he told me, hey, youngster, don't look like you're a bad guy. I can tell you come from a fairly decent family out there in society, and look like you're going to be in here for a long time, and you might want to get your act together. And the guys that you've been hanging out around, if you keep hanging out around them, you're either going to lose your life in here, or you're going to either end up spending the rest of your life in here. So you might want to pick a different crowd of people to hang out around. He said in the process, you might learn that a book is going to be your best friend in there anyway. So if you don't know how to read, you might want to learn how to read and get you a dictionary. And you need to set you up a program on how you go about preparing yourself to increase your ability to read and comprehend and communicate. He said to communicate with the free world is going to be the only source of freedom you're going to have and know. And so the pictures you get, the letters you receive, the phone calls you make, and the visits you can convince people to come and to share with you is going to be your closest contact with society. So that's something that you might want to take serious. And I thought about that. And as I'm walking further, I thanked him for sharing that with me. And I asked him, could he share a little bit more with me how I can go about doing that? He said, well, do this for 1 year. Get you a book and get you a dictionary. And as you're reading that book, every word that you come across that you don't understand, write it down. And write down the definition of that word according to what it's saying in the book. Not according to the 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 different definitions that might be there. Use the definition that's related to the book, what it's telling you. He said, but after you get 5 words, he said, put the book to the side and start writing a letter. And include each one of those words in that letter. And once you include all 5 of those words in that letter, fold the letter up, put it in the mailbox and send it out. Or put it to the side, resume reading, and when you come across 5 more words, put the book to the side, resume writing a letter again, and include all 5 of those words in that letter. He said, and at whatever point you feel like you want to drop the letter in the mailbox, or whatever point you feel like you want to stop reading for the night and resume it the next day, he said, but do that 5 days a week for 1 year. He said, and then after 1 year, see where you might be at in life. And I incorporated that into my program. And after I had begun to do it for about 3 months, 4 months, my mother was the first person that noticed the change in my letter writing and commented on it. And my mother said to me, Paul, you know, I can really understand what you're saying in your letters now. And I'm like, whoa, wait a minute, Mama, I've been writing these letters all along. You mean to tell me you just not understanding what I'm saying? She said, yeah, I'm just now beginning to understand what you're saying in your letters. Because before you would just write all the way through, and I didn't know where to stop reading that or what point you was making, because I didn't know how to use the proper punctuation. And as a result of me reading and using the dictionary to understand, I developed a better style of writing that helped me understand how to communicate a little better. And in the process, it strengthened my relationship with my mother. It helped strengthen my relationship with the young lady I was seeing at the time, involved with, and then I was able to communicate with other people after she felt she couldn't hang with me any longer and she had to go her separate way. But the most devastating experience that I had is when I was 24 and a half years old, and I made a phone call home one day, and my niece answered the phone, Sonia, and she said, Paul, ain't nobody here. Everybody's at the hospital to see Grandpa. And I said, what? She said, yeah, Grandpa got sick and he's in the hospital. And I didn't know what to think or what. And I said, okay. And at that time, I was only allowed 10 minutes on the phone call, 1 call a week. And so I wasn't able to call anybody else to find out because everybody was at the hospital to see my dad. So following week, I make a phone call and I found out that my dad had numerous strokes. He had emphysema and he had a serious blockage. And he was in St. Luke's Hospital in Pasadena. And because of his blockage, preventing his body from being able to give him the strength that he needed to be strong enough for a surgery to be performed to remove the blockage. And the only way the blockage could be removed was through surgery. And they couldn't do the blockage, they couldn't do the surgery because the blockage was the only thing that, removing the blockage was the only thing that would have helped him get stronger. So the doctor says, we give him 2 weeks to live. So at that point, my father's last request was to see his baby boy before he passed away. And as I said, I'm the youngest of 7 children. And my mother and father were in their mid and late 40s when I was born. And so here I am faced with this information. We're trying to prepare the system to clear me to go see my dad at his dying bedside. So my sister-in-law was willing to send the money for 2 correctional officers to escort me to my father's dying bedside whenever really only 1 was needed. But they wanted to assure that this process would take place to honor my father's wishes. And I went before 3 associate wardens, and I sat down, and the 3 associate wardens had my central file in front of them. And my central file was the file that had all my information in it that pertained to me from A to Z. And they said, Mr. Scott, as a result of you being a lifer without a release date, as a result of the violence in your past, and as a result of you going back to your hometown, we feel that you will pose escape risk. And you will... As I processed the thoughts, walking back to my prison cell, with the thought process of never being able to see the man alive again that was responsible for bringing me into this world, I knew no way of how to process those thoughts. And all I could think of is some kind of way of dealing with this pain I was feeling, because I was feeling a form of pain that was unbelievable. I felt powerless. I felt helpless. And I felt hopeless. And I knew nothing to do. I had no type of resources that I could gravitate to help me find some kind of relief. And all I could think of was my son, the very first time he came to see me himself, whenever he was only 2 years old. And his mom brought him to see me. And we was on a visit together in the visiting room. I reflected back on that and I realized that I'm in prison doing a life sentence. And I was wondering, how might my son feel as he grow up? What thought process might he have towards me not being there for him? And what other things might I miss out on in sharing with my son about my dad that I probably never would have an opportunity to learn because my dad was on his dying bed and I didn't have a chance to go see him. Then I thought about my brothers whenever they came to visit me with my dad, the day that I got married on January the 22nd of 1982. This was the only picture that I have that all three of my older brothers and my dad and I was on together, taken in a prison visiting room as I was preparing to get married to the young lady that was my high school sweetheart. I reflected back on that occasion and I was wondering how my brothers might feel with dealing with my dad's death without me being able to be present to support the family through that. And that caused me to feel guilty. So as a result of feeling all those different emotions, I decided to do the one thing that I only knew how to do to deal with such pain. And that was to make a connection with a guy that I could get some type of narcotics to help me deal with the pain. So I made a connection with a guy that lived in another part of the prison section to meet me at the chapel to bring some narcotics in order to help me feel a little better. And I went to the Protestant chapel, and I had two other gentlemen with me, and the plan was for me to carry the money and get the money to the guy. When the guy passed me the package, I was going to leave out of the chapel with the package, and the two other gentlemen were going to follow me. And in the process of us going back to the living section where we were housed at, if the plaza security correctional officers would have begun to try to pull me over and put me against the wall, they were going to play like they were fighting to distract them to come to them, that would make a way for me to enter into the section with the package without getting searched and getting it confiscated. However, in the process of us waiting, this gentleman never showed up. And there was a message being preached by a gentleman by the name of Eddie Ronquilla, who testified that he had did 25 years on installment. And he once was a part of the Mexican mafia, and he dropped out, and he joined the ministry, and they gave him a pass on not retaliating on him, provided he stayed committed to doing what he was doing for the Lord. And here he is, he was sharing his testimony, he was preaching, and as he was preaching, the gentleman that I came with said, "Hey, Paul, don't look like this guy gonna show up." And I said, "Yeah, man, I know it." And they said, "Well, look, man, we out of here." And I said, "Well, I can't get up." They said, "You can't get up?" Say, "Man, we done seen you lift everything on the prison yard. What you mean you can't get up? Man, you crazy. We out of here." And they got up and left. But I wasn't able to get up. It seemed like something just had me pinned to my chair. And as this gentleman continued to preach for another 10 or 15 minutes, he said, "If there's anyone in the sound of my voice who haven't accepted Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior and would like to, come up to the altar." And it felt like something grabbed me by the seat of my pants and just threw me up to the altar. And I went up there, I fell on my knees, and I began to pray. And as I did the prayer, I did the salvation prayer, and I broke out in tears, and I started crying. And when I raised up after doing the salvation prayer, a guy that I had gotten into it with on the weight pile a few days prior to this, I turned around, and when I turned around, he reached in his back pocket, and he pulled out a tract, just as if he would pull it out and to shake me, if that would have been his intentions. But he pulled out a tract. And when he gave me that tract, he said, "Brother, take this and read this, and I'll see you here tomorrow for the Sunday service, and we're going to praise and worship the Lord together." And I thought that was amazing, and I felt that a life transition was beginning to take place. And from that day, that was the day that my life had changed in a spiritual manner that had never been the same ever since. And as I journeyed on, I realized how important it was for me to transform my life. So I was talking to my mother on the phone following my father's death on August the 3rd of 1985. I talked to my mother the next day on the phone, which was August the 4th, which was a Sunday. And I promised my mother that I would get an education, that I would stop screwing up, and I would do the best I could to get out of there and get released so I could return home to my family. And so I decided to enroll in the academics program, and I managed to get my GED, my high school diploma. I managed to get a certificate in dry cleaning. I managed to get a certificate in x-ray technician. I managed to get a certificate as a dental technology. I managed to get my dual diagnosis drug and alcohol counselor. I managed to get my certification as a certified HIV and hepatitis C counselor. And I happen to work for the head psychiatrist in doing dual diagnosis drug and alcohol treatment. Even managed to set up a hospice program for the inmates who had HIV that got converted to AIDS, and whenever they got submitted in the hospital, we were able to be present with them in their last hours before they died, where we promised that we would never let an inmate die alone. However, following my father's death, my grandmother passed away some 8 months later. I wasn't permitted to go to her funeral. Following my grandmother's death, 6 years later, my sister died from an overdose of cocaine, heart failure. I wasn't able to go to her funeral, but I was able to write something to be shared at her funeral, and it was shared on my behalf, and I promised that I would do the best I possibly could to serve God and be of a service in the prison to help people bring about a change in their life from the bad to the good. I went before the Board of Prison Terms for the 8th time in mid-October of 1998, and I was denied parole again. And some 2 weeks after I was denied parole on this occasion, my mother had a massive stroke and was placed in an extended care convalescent home. And I swore if anything happened to my mother while I was in there, that I might as well get written off, because I wasn't going to be fit for society in any way, shape, or form. But during all that process, God made a way for me to be developed and nurtured, where I was able to hold my own and endure. The funny thing about all this is my son was in the Los Angeles County Jail at the time that my mother died. And he was fighting a life sentence because he was in an automobile where gunfire was exchanged, and he was arrested, and he was arrested with the charges of conspiracy to commit murder. His mother was afraid that what happened to me was going to happen to him, and because he was named after me, this caused him to be placed in a higher category to be prosecuted at the full extent of the law. And as a result of them offering him a deal, his mother convinced him into taking the deal because she didn't want to happen to me what happened to him, so he took a 7-year deal. When I found out that my son had taken this deal, I informed my supervisor that he might be losing me working in the psychiatric department as his head clerk, doing dual diagnosis drug and alcohol counseling, and he wanted to know why. And I told him because my son just caught a case and he took a 7-year deal, and because I've never lived with him one day in society, wherever my son go, I have to be there with him, because I haven't been able to be a father to him in society, so I need to be a father to him now. And a week later, a bus came to receiving and release, and my son got off of that bus, and I was informed very shortly after that my son was in R&R, and I was able to arrange to get a pass to go down to R&R to see my son. And it was my first time seeing him over a 3-year period of time. He was 19 years old at this time, the same age I was when I entered the system. And the last time I saw him, he was 16 years old. We embraced, we cried, and we were allowed to be in one another's company for an hour or so before we would have to separate. I was able to see him the next day. And 4 months following the day of his arrival, we were allowed to become cellmates. Administration didn't allow us to cell up right away because we never lived together in society. They felt that we didn't know one another well enough to just put one another in the cell, and they didn't want him to do anything to disrupt my program. And so therefore we had to spend some time, and we were monitored by administration, and after we spent the quality enough time together, they trusted us enough to allow us to become cellmates. And we were cellies up to 4 years till I was eventually found suitable for parole and released. There were other instances that I got in trouble in society with the law that I choose not to divulge at this time, because I have a soon to be released book that will come out, and it will disclose that information. But I realized that as a result of what happened to me when my mother dropped me off at school that very first day, and my walking up that walkway, and me looking back at my mother drive away, and me saying, "Mom, I thought you loved me, and if you really love me, why you bring me to this place and leave me?" I couldn't understand the separation that caused me to have between my mother and my father, because everything that I was subjected to in school, I felt that my mother and father was responsible for happening to me. And the only time I ever perceived any love being shared with me by my mother and father is when I got in trouble, because they had to come to my rescue. So there were times that I got into trouble intentionally just for my father to come to my rescue to show me that he loved me. But this time I got into some trouble when I caught this case and went to prison that my father couldn't get me out of. And I felt so bad that I don't want any of this to flow over and affect my son. And I had already been through a number of extensive therapy and self-help programs to help me get the necessary insight I needed to deal with my guilt and be able to provide myself with the love that my father was not able to give me. But at the same time, I'm here living with my son now in a prison cell, that I'm seeing how he has anger towards me because I wasn't able to be available for him in society when he needed me the most. And now here he is in a prison cell sharing it with his daddy, and I'm looking at the anger that he had towards me, the distrust that he had toward me, the suspicion that he had toward me. And inside, that was eating me alive. I felt embarrassed. I felt guilty. I felt hurt. I felt ashamed, because the same institution I was at sharing a prison cell with my son, there were other correctional officers, lieutenants, captains that had sons, daughters, mothers, mother-in-laws, uncles that worked at the same institution. So it's like I'm housed at an institution with my son that's being ran by officers and administrators that have family that work there. And it almost reminded me of being on a slave plantation. And it helped me relate to some of the pain and anguish and misery that our ancestors, that Afro-Americans suffered whenever they were in deep forms of slavery. So I could identify with that traumatizing effect. So I had to play father as well as be a prisoner, abide by the rules and regulations, but also try to share love with my son. And that caused me to be so scattered on many occasions, but I was able to endure it as a result of the commitment that I made to better my life rather than keep it the same. The Board of Prison term for the 8th time on May the 14th of 2005, which was the same day that I got sentenced on May the 14th of 1981. And it's amazing that the Board of Prison terms found me suitable on this occasion when I appeared before them. But during the process of the hearing, one of the questions the Board of Prison terms asked me is, Mr. Scott, if you were to be released, what is something you'd like to do in the community? I told him I would like to do something in honor of the gentleman who had lost his life as a result of me being a participant in it and me taking full responsibility for my actions. And the Board of Prison terms asked me, what would you like to do, Mr. Scott? And I told the Board of Prison terms that I would like to help people avoid making the mistake that I made, and I would like to help family members who have been victimized get through their pain, their grief, and their suffering. And as a result of that, I was found suitable for parole, and on October the 3rd of 2005, I was released from the California Department of Corrections and allowed to return to society. Everything was completely different and new to me. I applied for numerous jobs and started out working through agencies and everything. And after being home for approximately 2.5 years, I finally applied for a job as a family care specialist with an organ procurement organization in Southern California. And upon applying for that job, initially I was declined the job, and I applied for the job some 6 months later. And when I went on the job interview, I was completely honest with the people. One of the requirements was to be bilingual. And I let them know that I'm not bilingual, but I am Ebonic. And what I meant simply by being Ebonic was that I would know how to interact with a variety of different Afro-Americans on various levels of life. And that I had done the research on the internet to see that their consent rate for the Afro-American community could use some improvement. So when I applied for the job, I let them know that I may not be able to speak to the Hispanic community, but I definitely can speak with the Afro-American community. And if I don't do anything else for your organization, I can improve your consent rate for your Afro-American community. The statistics for the consent rate for 2010, 2011, and 2013 were at record-breaking pace for the Afro-American community. In fact, I improved it in 2010 from a 36% consent rate to a 110% increase, which placed me in a position that I was able to remain pretty secure with the employment that I had. Why do I share this? I share this because I learned these skills while incarcerated. I applied myself each day to do what was necessary to obtain something, at least one thing on a day-to-day basis that would be equivalent to participating or doing something in society. And I believe that's what nurtured me in a way to help me be able to relate and interact and be pretty abreast with what was going on in the community when I eventually returned. The message that I would like to give off and to receive is that don't lose hope. Be encouraged that there's a way that you can succeed if you stay focused on doing the necessary things to better yourself and be prepared for society whenever you eventually get released. For those who know that they're going to get released, they should strive even more so to be prepared for society. But those who were faced with what I was faced with, a life sentence, not knowing whether they was going to release or not, get released or not, to keep the hope, to keep the faith, and always be encouraged to go the extra mile and understand that when you get released and you return to the community, have something to offer society rather than expecting society to have something to offer you. I honestly can say, had I not went to prison, I would not have learned the skills in which I did, and I would not have been a benefit to society in which I have. It's the Father's Day. I was at a hospital where an individual had lost his son, and he had a very close relationship with his son. He was an engineer working for a big organization, and his son died. And up on his son dying, his son was a registered organ donor. As I went through the paperwork with his father and everything, and his father saw how generous and courteous I was, he embraced me and told me, "Thank you for your service." And this was on a Saturday. The next day was Father's Day of 2013. And up on me going to the hospital that day to continue to provide the family with support, the father came to me with one of the alumni jerseys of this young man. And he gave this jersey to me. He got permission from the hospital staff for me and one of my co-workers. And his father stated that he wanted us to wear this because North Carolina State University was playing in a championship. And he had one of the shirts laying over his son like this as his son was in the bed. About 5 or 6 of his son's colleagues was already in his room with the shirts on. His sister had just came in from Italy, and she was wearing one. The mother and father was wearing one. And because my co-worker and I had been working with the family, the father felt led to give us one. And we all huddled around the bedside of this patient, and we took pictures along with his alumni shirt on. And in the process of taking these photos with this family, I went back to the room that we was assigned to carry out our work in, and I began to take the shirt off and put my smock back on. And I was walking back down to the patient's room to get a shirt back to the father. And as I was handing the shirt to the father, he said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Sir, I'm returning the shirt that you left." He said, "I gave that to you." And when the man said that he gave me this shirt, I told the man, "I'm not at liberty, sir, to disclose to you the extent of my life story right now." I said, "But one day you'll find out how important this is to me. And it's so important, sir, that on Father's Day today, for me to be here with you and your family, and for you to give me a gift like this under these conditions, this is the greatest Father's Day gift that I've ever received." And that's why I still hold this shirt in my possession today. Because out of all the Father Days that I missed while I was incarcerated, out of me not being able to go to my father's dying bedside when he requested to see his baby boy before he passed away, and for me to have to go before 3 associate wardens and for them to decline to allow me to go see my father at his dying bedside, I had to live with that all my life. And this organization that I work for gave me an opportunity to be available for a father when he lost his son, to give me one of his alumni shirts, to tell me this is a gift. And for this gift that has been given to me on Father's Day, truly, it's been the best Father's Day that I could have ever experienced to be of service. And to definitely be in line with the commitment that I made to the Board of Prison Terms that if I was released, I would like to be available to help people avoid making the mistake that I made, and help family members who have been victimized to get through their pain, their grief, and their suffering. Please forgive me for the emotions that were just displayed. I had no way of holding them back. It just hit me at a point that I just had to let it go. But it's interesting because I rode on an airplane. And the first airplane that I rode on, the organization I worked for was responsible for me riding on that plane. And I had been out I had been working for this organization for 3 months, and I had to go to Philadelphia for some grief counseling training. And when I got on that plane, I remembered when I was incarcerated how I would be reading books on the prison yard, and how I would look up in the sky and see the planes going across the sky, and I would pause in between my reading the book and I would say, wow, I wonder what it looks like or feel like on that airplane. And the only thing that I could relate to an airplane was what I had saw on television and what I had saw in magazines. So I said, if I ever get out of this place one day, I want to be able to ride on an airplane. And the organization I worked for afforded me that opportunity. And whenever we first started taking off, I realized that I wasn't at Disneyland, I wasn't at Magic Mountain, and I wasn't at Knott's Berry Farm. That this wasn't going to be something that I was going up on, that I would be coming back down on in the short length of time, that I was going to be up there for a while. And my heart started beating fast, but I was able to overcome that anxiety and endure the flight very comfortably afterwards. This was the last photo that I had taken while I was incarcerated. Every 5 years, they would take a new photo of the prisoners to stay updated with their appearance, how they looked at the present time. And the name of the organization that I work for is One Legacy, and I have an organization incorporated called Chains to Planes. And that is, I once was in chains when I was incarcerated, and now I'm in planes, because One Legacy afforded me that opportunity to ride in an airplane for the very first time. And this Chains to Plane organization is designed not just for people to be referring to people being in shackles or being in chains, and it's not just simply referred to people who ride in airplanes, but it's also referred to people who are on different planes of life, how to help people elevate to different levels of life and advance. Whenever they've been told they would never be nothing, they'll never succeed, you went as far as you can go, or they may have surrendered their fight for life and given up on themselves. Whatever the case may be, Chains to Planes is to help encourage and restore people's faith and confidence and help them go out and face the world and endure and be an inventor, a creator, an entrepreneur, contribute to helping the world become a better place rather than staying stuck where they are and compromising their gifts and their qualities and their potential for life. I have an upcoming book, and the title of that book is Chains to Planes as well, because it's going to share what I was not able to present to you today in a more in-depth detail, play by play, from start to finish, all the in and out parts of it. And the interesting thing about it is the portion of the book will be able to enlighten you on the severe battles that I fought psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, physically, because being incarcerated for 25 years, from the age of 19 to the age of 44, losing my father, my grandmother, my sister, and my mother, and not being able to be present with them, and then my only child, son, coming to the institution I was at 4 months after my mother had passed away, and then him and I becoming cellmates. Please be alert for my upcoming book, Chains to Planes by Paul D. Scott. If you are a part of an organization that would like to arrange for me to come speak, you can reach me at, and I am available to travel anywhere in the continental of the United States to share what is necessary to assist you in accomplishing the goals you have set to contribute to help the world become a better place and help people rise to the various planes of life that they can elevate to become the people that they were created to be. Thank you very kindly for your attention and time regarding this.